Picture this. It's a sweltering night in New Orleans, 1919. Windows cracked open for the slightest breeze. Somewhere, a gramophone crackles with early jazz. Suddenly, wood splinters. A shadow slips through a panel cut in the back door. By morning, the newspapers scream of another family butchered in their beds, killed by an axe that isn't theirs. Over the span of just a few years, a faceless killer turned one of America's most musical cities into a stage for pure terror. He murdered with an axe, vanished into the dark, and then did something so bizarre it still chills people today. He wrote a letter claiming he'd spare anyone who filled the night with the sound of jazz. In this video, we're diving into the story of the Axeman of New Orleans, part true crime, part urban legend, part psychological horror. Lock your doors, dim the lights, and let's begin. To understand the Axeman, we have to step into New Orleans at the end of the 1910s, a city alive with brass bands, crowded streetcars, and a nightlife pulsing with early jazz. But beneath the music there was fear, poverty, ethnic tensions, organized crime, and a police force already overwhelmed. In this episode, we'll walk through the murders, examine the Axeman's infamous letter, explore the victims' stories, and unpack the major theories, from mafia hitman to deranged drifter. We'll also look at what modern profiling might say about a killer like this. If you're into deep dive true crime and dark history, this is exactly the kind of story we explore here. So while we're setting the stage, tap that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future cases, and stay with me until the end, because the way this story just stops says almost as much as the murders themselves. Our story really begins in the mid-1910s. New Orleans was a melting pot. Italian immigrants, African American communities, Creole families, all crammed into dense neighborhoods. Many Italian grocers lived behind or above their small stores, making them easy targets, visible, vulnerable, often cash-heavy. Crime was already a problem. The city had a reputation for violence, political corruption, and a shadowy connection to the early Sicilian mafia. Police resources were thin, forensic science was primitive, and the idea of a serial killer wasn't yet part of everyday thinking. At the same time, a new sound was taking over: jazz. In smoky bars and crowded dance halls, musicians experimented with syncopation and improvisation. To some, jazz was thrilling and modern. To others, it was dangerous, immoral, even demonic. Into that atmosphere of suspicion, anxiety, and social change stepped an unidentified killer whose brutality would grip the city like a fever dream. The Axeman's crimes didn't emerge from nowhere. Before his name hit newspapers, New Orleans had already seen a wave of axe attacks, many targeting Italian grocers. Some historians argue that the Axeman may be part of a broader pattern stretching back years. One early case often linked is the 1910 murder of an Italian grocer named Cruti, killed in his bed with an axe. Others followed, attacks with similar elements: a back door chiseled open, the family's own axe used, money often left untouched. But police treated these as isolated crimes. By 1918, however, the pattern became too hard to ignore. In May, an attack on the Maggio family shocked the city with its brutality. The press began to sense a story, and fearful rumors spread. People whispered of a phantom killer who slipped through locked doors and left no fingerprints, motivated by something far darker than robbery. The stage was set for the Axeman's reign of terror. On the night of May 22nd, 1918, the Axeman fully stepped into the public imagination. Joseph and Catherine Maggio, Italian grocers, slept in a small apartment behind their store. Around dawn, a family member discovered a horrifying scene. Both had been attacked in their bed. Their throats were slit and their skulls crushed with an axe. Catherine was nearly decapitated. The killer had chiseled a panel out of the back door, slipped inside, and used the family's own axe, later found discarded in the house. A bloody razor was also discovered, linking suspicion to one of Joseph's brothers who owned a barber shop. Police initially focused on relatives, assuming a crime of passion. But there was no clear motive, and the extreme violence didn't fit. Crucially, money and valuables were untouched. The press seized the story. Yet without solid leads, the case stalled. New Orleans tried to move on, but the Axeman wasn't finished. Not even close. On June 27th, 1918, just over a month later, the Axeman struck again, this time at the home of Louis Bessumer and his mistress, Anna Lowe. They were found in their bed, skulls smashed with an axe. Remarkably, both were still alive when discovered, though gravely injured. Once again, the weapon used was an axe belonging to the victims, and a panel had been removed from the back door. Here, the investigation took a strange turn. As she lay dying, Anna reportedly accused Bessumer himself, suggesting some personal motive. Police, perhaps eager to believe it wasn't a random madman, arrested him. He was later released, but public confidence in the investigation eroded. The press began connecting dots. Same style of entry, same weapon choice, same brutality, no obvious robbery. A pattern was emerging. Whispers turned to headlines. People asked the terrifying question, was New Orleans being stalked by a single unstoppable killer? The attack that truly ignited citywide panic came on August 5th, 1918, when the Axeman targeted a pregnant woman named Mrs. Schneider. Unlike the earlier victims, she survived and was able to give a partial account. She awoke to see a dark figure standing over her bed, then felt a crushing blow to her head. When neighbors found her, she was covered in blood, her scalp split open. Miraculously, both she and her unborn child lived. Again, a panel had been chiseled from the back door. Again, the attacker used a household axe. Again, nothing of value was taken. Newspapers now had a monstrous narrative, a phantom intruder who attacked women in their beds, even expectant mothers, seemingly without motive. Headlines grew more sensational. People began sleeping with weapons nearby, boarding up windows and keeping lights burning all night. Despite mounting fear, police still had no workable suspect, just a trail of broken doors and shattered skulls. As 1918 turned to 1919, the Axeman's attacks continued, with victims like Charles and Rosie Cortimiglia and the infant daughter they tried desperately to protect. The pattern held. Italian grocers or their families, attacked at night, throat or skull targeted, entry made through a crudely cut back door panel. Yet every case contained oddities. In some, food was left half-eaten, suggesting the killer stayed calmly in the house after the attack. In others, he carefully cleaned the axe and left it in the yard. Money was rarely, if ever, taken. The victims were predominantly of Italian descent, fueling rumors that this was ethnic targeting or a message from organized crime. Others whispered that no human could come and go so silently. Superstitions flourished. People claimed to hear footsteps on roofs, see shadows in alleys, glimpse a hat and axe in the corner of their eye. New Orleans felt haunted by a living man no one could catch. Then came the letter. On March 13th, 1919, the Times-Picayune published what it claimed was a letter from the Axeman himself. Written in flamboyant, taunting language, it began, "Esteemed mortal of New Orleans," and declared the author a demon from the hottest hell. Most chillingly, the writer issued a challenge. The following Tuesday night, he would pass over the city like the angel of death, killing anyone whose home was not filled with the sound of jazz. Any house with jazz music playing, he wrote, would be spared. The effect was electric. People debated whether the letter was authentic, a hoax, or the work of a sadistic prankster. But few were willing to take the risk. Jazz musicians booked out every dance hall. Families crowded into bars and clubs. Gramophones spun all night. For one surreal evening, terror and music fused, turning New Orleans into the strangest party in American crime history. That night, March 19th, 1919, became legendary. Diners packed into restaurants where jazz bands played frantically until dawn. Families dragged pianos to windows, cranked gramophones, or hired musicians to perform in their living rooms. The city echoed with trumpets, clarinets, and drums. Even people who hated jazz swallowed their pride and kept the music loud. A few brave or stubborn holdouts stayed quiet, convinced it was all a joke, but most weren't willing to gamble with their lives. And the result? No one was killed that night. This would fuel the Axeman myth forever. Did the letter writer keep his promise? Was it proof he was real, or evidence that he was just a clever hoaxer exploiting public fear? Or did the killer simply choose not to strike for unrelated reasons? Whatever the truth, that night crystallized the Axeman as something more than a murderer, a figure at the crossroads of terror and music. Police and the public desperately sought explanations. Why these victims? Why axes? Why the theatrical letter? One major theory centered on the Italian community and early mafia activity. Many victims were Italian grocers, exactly the kind of small business owners who might be pressured for protection money. Some historians suggest the attacks could be punishment for non-compliance, disguised as random horror. Others point to the pattern of using the victim's own axes and leaving valuables untouched as signs of a sexual sadist or psychopath fixated on control rather than profit. The grotesque letter, then, might be the killer's attempt to dominate not just individuals, but an entire city's imagination. A third camp sees the letter as an opportunistic hoax by someone unrelated to the murders. Maybe a musician or prankster who wanted to promote jazz or simply revel in chaos. The problem? None of these theories fully explain every detail. The case stubbornly resisted neat answers. Over the years, several suspects have been proposed, though none conclusively proven. One name that surfaces often is a man named Joseph Momfrey, or Monfrey, supposedly a criminal with ties to the Italian underworld. A later account claimed he was shot and killed in Los Angeles by the widow of one of the Axeman's alleged victims, hinting she believed he was responsible. But records on Momfrey are murky, and some historians question whether he even existed as described. Other suspects included local laborers, drifters, jealous lovers, and even members of the victims' own families. Each had fragments of motive or opportunity, but no one matched every crime with solid evidence. Complicating things further, some murders attributed to the Axeman might be copycats or unrelated domestic attacks folded into the legend. With no forensic science beyond basic fingerprints and witness accounts, the trail grew colder with every passing month. By late 1919, the attacks tapered off. The last widely accepted Axeman case is often considered the murder of Mike Pepitone in October 1919, killed in his home, again in brutal fashion. After that, nothing. The sudden stop raises as many questions as the crimes themselves. Did the Axeman die, get imprisoned for another offense, or simply move to a new city under a new name? Or had multiple attackers been involved all along, with the pattern only seeming unified in hindsight? Meanwhile, the story took on a life of its own. Writers, musicians, and filmmakers reimagined the Axeman as a demon, a ghost, or a symbol of the chaos beneath New Orleans' beauty. His jazz ultimatum became a kind of dark folklore, half cautionary tale, half macabre joke. In reality, families were left with no closure, no justice, and a lingering sense that, for a time, evil walked freely among them. Stepping back, what can we actually take away from the Axeman of New Orleans? First, the known facts are far fewer than the myths. We have a cluster of brutal axe attacks, many against Italian grocers, a distinctive method of entry, and one theatrically written letter published in the press. Almost everything else, motives, identity, even how many attacks truly belong to the same hand, is interpretation. Second, the case shows how fear and media can shape a killer's legacy. The Axeman might have been a single violent criminal, but newspapers, rumors, and that now infamous letter transformed him into a near supernatural figure. Third, the jazz connection, whether real or hoax, reveals something uncanny. At least for one night, music became both a coping mechanism and a supposed shield against death. Finally, the story reminds us how many victims of history's most talked about crimes remain overshadowed by the killer's legend. If this deep dive into the Axeman of New Orleans pulled you into that strange world of jazz, fear, and unsolved murder, there are a few things you can do next. First, let me know in the comments. What's your leading theory? Mafia enforcer, lone psychopath, hoax-enhanced urban legend. Who or what do you think the Axeman really was? I read through your theories, and they often spark future cases we cover. Second, if you haven't already, hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss upcoming episodes on other unsolved killers, historical conspiracies, and dark corners of history. Finally, if you want more right now, queue up the playlist linked on screen and in the description. There's a case there about another early 20th century phantom attacker that pairs perfectly with this one. Thanks for sticking with this story to the end. Lock your doors, but maybe, just maybe, leave the jazz playing.